Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Buddhism and Ecology Summit, Living the Dharma in a Time of Crisis. I'm Carolyn with Tricycle, the Buddhist Review, and I'm so pleased to be here with you today for this conversation from Empirical to Embodied, Ways of Relating to the Earth with Terry Tempest Williams, Stephanie Kaza, and Mary Evelyn Tucker. Today's event is part of a week-long conversation series hosted in honor of Earth Day 2022. Tricycle is grateful to our partner, the Yale Forum for Religion and Ecology, for their support in putting on this conversation. We're pleased to be offering this summit free of charge. And if you'd like to make a donation to Tricycle, you can visit tricycle.org/donate. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Mary Evelyn Tucker is a senior lecturer and research scholar at Yale University in the School of the Environment, as well as the Divinity School and the Department of Religious Studies. She teaches in the joint MA program in Religion and Ecology and directs the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology with her husband, John Grimm. She edited Buddhism and Ecology with Duncan Williams as a part of the Harvard series of World Religions and Ecology. Terry Tempest Williams is a conservationist, advocate for free speech, and author of books including Refuge, An Unnatural History of Family and Place, and Finding Beauty in a Broken World. Her work explores how environmental issues are social issues that ultimately become matters of justice. Her writing has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, Orion Magazine, and numerous anthologies worldwide as a crucial voice for ecological consciousness and social change. She is a writer in residence at the Harvard Divinity School. And finally, Stephanie Kaza is Professor Emerita of Environmental Studies at the University of Vermont and former director of the UVM Environmental Program. She co-founded the Environmental Council at UVM and served as director for the Sustainability Faculty Fellows Program, a longtime practitioner of Soto Zen Buddhism with training at Green Gulch Zen Center and further study with Thich Nhat Hanh, Joanna Macy, and John Daidu Laurie. She is the author of books including Green Buddhism, Practice and Compassionate Action in Uncertain Times. Thank you all so much for being here. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn and Tricycle, for pulling this all together. And I'm so happy to be with two very dear friends of a long, long time. You know, I'm going to begin with a poem from this lovely little book called Held, Blessings for the Depths. And this particular poem celebrates dance, and it's from a Filipino woman who's an activist for peace and justice and women's rights, Norma Dulaga. We dance the dance of struggle and hope. We dance the rhythm, rhyme, ritual, and melody of poets, babaylan, thinkers, and artists. We dance their protests and subversive prose. We dance the movement of indigenous peoples as they resist the destruction of Mother Earth, of sea, of sky, mountain, and forest, while plunderers accrue the immoral profit, trump their strides of gluttony and nature's robbery. The empire bows and sways to the gods of revenue and greed, extracted from farmers and the workers. Yet, we join the rising battle of these downtrodden and undulate in the dance of release, redemption, and freedom. We dance the dangerous dance of struggle. We dance with whole body, spirit, and soul. We dance with the wind and the ashes, the ruins of the old tyrant rule. We dance until oppression is no more. The spirit of these two wonderful women I'm with today, I think also reflects the sense of dance in spite of everything, in the face of everything. And that's the moment when creativity arises, when newness arises. The babaylan that's mentioned in this beautiful poem is women, shamanic, and artistic types. And again, Terry and Stephanie, I think, really represent that. So I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves in terms of their sense of contemplation, attention, Buddhist practice, and the larger issues that we're going to be talking about here. I'm going to begin with Stephanie, then I'll say a few words as well, and Terry will bring us around in this introduction circle of dance. So Stephanie, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Mary Evelyn, and again, thank you, Tricycle, for hosting us. It really is a joy to be reunited with two dear, dear old friends. So I'm going to show just a couple of images so you know a little bit more. Um, I need my host to enable me to do that. But if not, let me just say that I am living now in the watershed of the Columbia and Willamette Rivers in the traditional lands of the Multnomah, the Clawiwala, the Clackamas, and the Walla bands of Chinookan peoples, and the Tualatin band of the Kalapuya. And so I take this very seriously as starting from sense of place. I'm also in the middle of a subduction zone. The Cascadia subduction zone determines everything here in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm always aware of the earth moving and what's been created around me. This shapes my Buddhist practice and my dance of life. You should also know that I have Hungarian heritage and heritage on my mother's side from back in the Mayflowers. So there's no shortage of decolonization work to do and integration of some of those non-Buddhist lineages. And then among my teachers, I really want to credit those in the Soto Zen lineage. Kobun Shino Odagawa is my lay ordination teacher. And I've also been strongly influenced by Robert Aiken, the Buddhist activist, and also John Daido Loori, a beautiful creative photographer. Of course, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and very strongly Thich Nhat Hanh, an activist and peacemaker from the start. And I'll also mention that I've been living in the mind of Joanna Macy. This is a very important Buddhist ecology scholar, and I've had the good fortune to collaborate with her, teach with her, learn from her since, well, now it's 30 years. And she is turning 93 in a couple of weeks. And I pulled together a tribute volume for her, A Wild Love for the World, which was such a joy to do, going to her house every month down in Berkeley from up here in Portland. And just recently helped her edit the 30th anniversary of her most favorite collection, World is Lover, World is Self. So we are going to be working again on a program for Upaya Zen Center, which is where I'm currently doing the most practice and the most teaching with Roshi Joan Halifax. So that's a little bit where I'm dancing now on the West Coast and in my Buddhist practice.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I too acknowledge the indigenous peoples and the land that I'm on here in the New Haven area, the Quinnipiac, and many, many others. And I just wanted to share that I was very blessed when I went to Japan in 73, 74 to teach at a college there, a women's college. And it was a very disorienting experience. Japan was almost at the end of the Meiji era still in certain ways, and was stunned to see a foreigner in this city of several 100,000 people. But I went to a small monastery in the countryside there in Soja, and I met an extraordinary Buddhist master whose name is Fukushima Keido. And he later went on to become the head of the Rinzai sect in Japan at Tofukuji in Kyoto. But when he was the monk at this little monastery in the countryside, it was just stunning to me that he would allow a woman to come and sit with him. There were 2 or 3 other American men who were studying with him at the time, and we had a ball actually all together. And this monk had a great sense of humor and joy and delight. It's where Seshu, the artist, had painted the little mouse running in the corner. And when he went on to become the head of the Rinzai sect in Japan, he also came and visited in the States. Every spring he would come. Jay McDaniel knew him, and many, many others. He would go to these universities and have Dharma talks, and he would do incredible calligraphy. He was a great, great calligrapher. And the students were just stunned by him. Again, with humor, with grace, with the artistic sensibilities, with stories, and that sense of him as a person, as a bridge between cultures. He always loved bridges and considered himself to be such a bridge. The other person I certainly want to acknowledge Daido Loori, as did Stephanie, because we would bring him to Bucknell when he was living in the Catskills, and he would come often, and the students also loved him. There's also Buddhist-Christian dialogue that went on in Japan, and Nomiya Lassalle, who was in Hiroshima when the bomb dropped, he was a Jesuit. He became a great practitioner of Zen, and he had a Zendo outside of Tokyo, where he would invite people to come and meditate and so on. So he carried on one of the very early dialogues between Christianity and Buddhism, a remarkable human being in every possible way. And of course, I have to acknowledge Thomas Berry, who wrote a book on Buddhism and taught us Buddhism in graduate school. And he was a bodhisattva of wisdom and compassion of great, great proportions. I want to turn it over to Terry, who I think brings to all of us this astonishing sense of attention in the desert, but in many other places. And her keen eye and her soul work is something we all learn from and benefit from. So Terry, I would love to hear your sense of attention and ecological imagination blooming for you in the desert and in so many places.
It's such a thrill to be with you, Mary Evelyn and Stephanie. I haven't seen you for so long, and you reside in my heart, both of you. And I'm so grateful to be part of this community of Tricycle. So to all of you out there, my heart is open. I'm at the confluence, very near the confluence of the Charles River as it meets the Atlantic Ocean, and I'm a visitor here. I'm mindful that these are the traditional grounds of the Massachusetts people and the Wampanoag. And Mary Evelyn, I told you today, I felt this confluence of my own home, which is in the Red Rock Desert. And if I close my eyes, I could tell you that I am facing south to the LaSalle Mountains that rise close to 13,000 feet. I could tell you that if I turn to the west, I'm facing Porcupine Rim. If I turn again and face north, I'm facing the Colorado River, which is running dry right now in a drought we have not seen geologically for 2,500 years. And if I turn again east, I'm facing Castleton Tower, a 400-foot monolith that geologists now tell us has a pulse. Today, I felt this confluence walking up Arlington Street. I saw this halo of pink, and I realized they were cherry blossoms. And I kept walking, and it literally was a blizzard of these gorgeous, ephemeral, they felt like snow blossoms. And I went back up in honor of our conversation and brought this bowl that I have from home. And I felt rattlesnake and cherry blossoms. It was this beautiful confluence of home. And Mary Evelyn, you reminded me of I have two great teachers. One is my grandmother, Catherine Blackett Tempest. And her last words when I was with her, when she died, were dance, dance, dance. And my other great teacher is the land, always the land.
Terry, thank you so much. So beautiful. And just imagining those cherry blossoms on Arlington and the ones in Japan where the Japanese watch them from the southern Kyushu all the way up to Hokkaido. It's reported on the news and people gather for cherry blossom viewing. That whole sense of the ephemeral and yet the beautiful qualities that the Japanese do so well in Zen, in their arts, and so on. So I want to begin this next round with a quote from Rumi, which is very striking to me. Here's the quote. What in your life is calling you when all the noise is silenced the meetings adjourned, the list laid aside, and the wild iris blooms by itself in the dark forest. What still pulls on your soul? What still pulls on your soul? So, Stephanie and then Terry, what comes up in response to Rumi's ruminations? Can't do.
I've been listening to the trees for quite a long time, so the trees are still pulling on my soul very strongly, and I'm home now with my conifer tribes. We are watching how they go through climate change, and that is quite graphic. Just on Monday, we had a record-breaking snow here in Portland, Oregon, and it toppled 400 trees in the West Hills. The weight of the snow just dropping branches and splitting open the small crab apples in bloom. And last summer, I'm sure, heard of the record-breaking heat dome in the Pacific Northwest. And every single living being here in the Northwest had never experienced heat of that scale, 115 degrees. So it, of course, crisped my beans and other plants in the garden because you couldn't keep anything cool or shaded enough. But I saw the trees in the Coast Range where they were exposed to the open sun. Their limbs were burned, the leaves, conifers, you think, that can live through anything. So what I'm seeing now is some of the limits of capacity in our sturdy hundreds and thousands of year old tree canopy, even with the resilience. They didn't die, but how finely tuned they are to the seasons. And I will just say I have met a new elder with open hands, a magnificent western red cedar. This is a mother tree along the Oregon coast. It was a spring day only last month, and all the skunk cabbage was in bloom. Bright, dense yellow spathes in the cedar swamp, just radiating color like they were the sun itself, calling me deeper into the forest. So I felt when I finally stopped at this big old cedar that it was one of the mother trees for sure, a wisdom elder, a very big spirit presence. And it was a gift because I knew I'd be able to return to that tree for support, for inspiration, and perspective. And I will just say that what's really pulling on my spirit, drawing me to these trees for wisdom, is big, big questions about where do we find a moral path of justice that will heal the planet when every aspect of what we're doing is extractive, colonizing, exploitative. There's such a deep need for course correction. So my Buddhist question in my Buddhist soul, if we could say that as Buddhists, is how can the work of finding that moral path be liberating, awakened action? How can the very work that we do liberate us from suffering personally and planetarily? So I really see that what's pulling on my soul now is the interwoven binding threads of these karmic weights of what we have come to as human beings, of where our forests, our oceans are, of where all the suffering is at all levels. There are so many opportunities here for witness, for reckoning, and for a true moral call to respond from the wisdom space of these tree elders. So that's what's on my mind right now.
I echo what you're saying, Stephanie. Where we live, we're in drought, like so many places in the American West. Last summer, our desert burned. The Colorado River is so dry in places you can walk across. Great Salt Lake, for as far as you can see, is a horizon of salt. And when I went north to see the one place I've always counted on, the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge, 77,000 acres of wetlands that sparkle and sing, there was no birdsong. Those canals and ponds of water were sun-baked playas. And I couldn't accept it. And Brooke and I just kept going south. And then finally we did see some water. There was a horizon line of white pelicans. And there was a fingerling of water. And there was a great blue heron, a black-crowned night heron, two groupings of gulls, California gulls and Franklin gulls. And then there was one double-crested cormorant perched on a weathered fence post, drying its wings against the salt flats, and it looked like a black crucifix. So I think the thing that is pulling me is, how shall we live? How shall we live differently? And how do we not look away from all that is breaking our hearts? I think about Simone Weil when she said attention is a prayer. And I think my mind right now is looking at blossoms, thinking about blossoms, the ephemeral beauty that you mentioned, Mary Evelyn. And may I share a quick story? So it must have been in June, this beautiful coyote willow was just alive with magenta blossoms. And each individual blossom looked like large snapdragon blossoms, about the size of my little finger. And it was just on fire. This huge wind came, and there's a reason why it's bridges and mesas and arches where I come from in an erosional landscape. And within a flash, all the blossoms were gone. And the patio was just strewn with these blossoms. And it was so beautiful. And my own sense of attachment, I thought, well, I have to gather them, and I went inside to get a basket. When I came back, they were all gone. And the winds had come back. But I noticed there was this one blossom. And I bent down to look at it, and then it moved. And I thought, I am hallucinating. And then I saw that there were these little legs, and it was an ant carrying this huge blossom on its back, almost like a parasol. And I thought, I just want to follow it, him, her. And I just followed this ant, walking across the patio, turning left. It's a large patio. We live in the desert. And then I thought, this is it. It's now going to go off the little cliff into the sage and cactus. And I was just prepared for it to fall away. Just as it made that dive, 3 other ants came, lifted the blossom over that little crevasse, and just kept going, and they vanished. So here this ant was continuing with this blossom, walking along. I was walking behind it, trying to be unobtrusive. And then I saw this huge pad of prickly pear, and I thought, that's it. It's going to be impaled. The blossom will be left on one of the spines. That's it. Just as it was moving into this hazardous terrain, 4 ants came, lifted it, maneuvered it, navigated, lifted up, over, around, back onto the sand, disappeared. I watched the ant move through the red sand for probably another 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I don't know. What does one do in the desert but watch ants? And then I saw this fist rising up from the desert floor, and I thought, there it is. And it went up this steep hill all by itself, carrying this load, this pedal load. And it came up to the top of the ant mound, and it went right to the opening, laid down the blossom, and within seconds, 20, 30, 40 ants came, broke it down into little pieces, disappeared into the mound, and I imagined it was lining the canals for the queen. That's where I am. Finding beauty in a broken world is creating beauty in the world we find. How shall we live? How do we not look away from all that is breaking our hearts? The world is still so beautiful.
Terry, thank you so much. Just beautiful. And both of you, thank you for those those reflections. I'll just add a very short coda, because I do think finding beauty in this fragmented and broken world is such a key forward. And we'll carry that theme in some of the questions coming up. And I want to mention today, for example, the law school here at Yale has a whole program on animals, the more than human animals. And this one was on the Convention for Animal Protection, which I think most of us don't even know about. It's the second draft of an international convention for animal protection. And this discussion was so extraordinary, encouraging. That 5 of the drafters, 1 woman who was the moderator, boom, boom, boom. What are the issues? Does this involve factory farming? Does it involve animals in the wild? Does it involve animal products, et cetera? The whole gamut is included. And the open science and sense of one health for planetary health is what's moving this forward. The zoonotic diseases between humans and animals is, of course, was one of the instigators of it, but it's larger than that. And there's 12 universities across the US now that have animal law and behavior programs in ways that we certainly didn't have even 5 years ago. So that was a source of great, great encouragement. And I want to mention this lovely book of Kathleen Dean Moore, Earth's Wild Music, celebrating and defending the songs of the natural world, where she does music along with artistic reflections on birds, on extinction, and so on, this dance between art and ecology, ecosystems, and the living, moving creatures. It's very, very powerful. And I'm doing another little Zoom with her and Allison Deming, who's done this book on zoology, zoonotics, namely the impact of animals. And the reason I'm bringing that forward, Terry, is because you've mentioned ants, and who, between E.O. Wilson and Tom Lovejoy, who invented the word biophilia, you know, biophilia is what's bringing us back. This sense of what do we love? We love these connections. So I'll stop there, but your story really inspired this sense of the more than human world that's part of this extraordinary beauty and complexity. And that's a segue, I think, because one of the things I share with each of you, and I'm so grateful for your own paths in this direction, is that the ecological crisis is more than science, policy, law, economics, technology, et cetera. We know in its heart, in its soul, and that's by the question, what's drawing us, in its soul, the ecological crisis is a spiritual crisis. And we still need the language to understand that fully. But I'd love to, again, Stephanie, maybe you can lead us off. In what ways do you see this crisis that we're facing, the multiple crises, but as a spiritual crisis?
Well, let me draw here on my Buddhist teachings because they offer so much for us and they're so simple to understand along this exact line. Buddhism points right towards the big delusion that we all fall for by being simple human animals, and that is that we're a kind of independent self, that we're in charge of everything, that we make sure we get fed and we get what we need, and well, you know, kind of the big capital I, me, my, mine, I. And all the time, that's our primary biological drive. So it informs the way we see the world spiritually. And Buddhism takes that apart, points right to it as a super big fallacy that has caused us to rationalize tremendous harm to the planet. It's overridden our sense of relationality. In fact, the primary Buddhist law is about our interdependence, or our interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh calls it, that nothing we do is done independently. We are completely involved in relationship every second of the day, whether it's our families, or it's the sun warming the soil, or it's the plants that have been grown for us. But we have forgotten all of that, and more than forgotten, we have run over it and sort of dug it into the ground with our heels as a culture. And that's because what is ridden over that is big scale socioeconomic political patterns of exploitation, of profiteering, of objectifying these relations so that they seem separate from us. So as a result, as we all know through our own heartbreak, the planet and all of these relations are deteriorating rapidly to the point of extinction or to the point of major climate change. We're all being impoverished by this sense of separate self, by our dualistic thinking, we could say, of us and them, of me and other. Or as Bill McKibben says, of our hyper-individualism, particularly here in North America and in the West. We're very much the center of our own universe. And that is not true of all cultures, certainly not true of indigenous cultures. But our own consumerist culture, our capitalist culture, our colonialist culture, our settler culture has really amplified that hyper-individualism. So Buddhist teachings take that right on, especially in Zen. You're continuously being corrected for when you are a little bit too big as a self in practice, in the teachings, and so on. So we work to learn over and over again that we are not separate selves, that we are completely dependent on others. And the antidote we engage in is a kind of remembering, with a hyphen in it, becoming members again, becoming planetary people, becoming relational people, and truly knowing what our relations are. Right here in my own backyard, I have a very deep relationship with the apple tree out the window. I think of it and see it and talk to it every day. And the same with the cherry, the lilacs, the wisteria. These are all my friends. I'm trying hard to learn how to be in relationship with them. There is so much work I need to do to correct for the cultural imbalance. And Buddhist teachings start right there. They're very ecological. In fact, they're almost more than ecological, because our science of ecology doesn't really include human thought or emotion. It's pretty much looking at, which plants and animals live on which rocks and soils, what are their relations. But the Buddhist sense of interdependence is ecology plus, and it includes how we think about these things, how we feel them, how we perceive. And so much of that can be really understood differently when you see it through the eyes of interbeing. Thich Nhat Hanh himself, who just passed away a couple of months ago, cautioned his students. He said, "Don't feel bad about my death. You will see me everywhere you see a flower. Just understand how interconnected we all are. That will be my continuation body. And you only have to smile at a flower to smile at me."
Thank you, Stephanie. Lovely. Terry.
Two things come to mind. I remember taking a class from Charlie Hallisey, who many of you know. He teaches Buddhist studies at the Harvard Divinity School. And I took this class, it was on Shinran. I knew nothing about Shinran. And he said, this is a 12-week class. We will meet Shinran probably in the 8th week. But if you're impatient, here's 2 lines from Shinran. This happened. Now something else can occur. This happened. Now something else can occur. There were 12 of us in the class, and I just started weeping. And I couldn't stop. And I thought, should I leave? This is so humiliating. And everyone just kept on. And I was thinking, if I had been teaching, I would have stopped the class and said, "Are you okay?" He didn't. He just continued. And the class continued. And I continued sobbing for probably 20 minutes. My brother had just hung himself. And those two lines, this happened, now something else can occur, changed me in that moment. And then I re-entered the class. And at the end of the class, I went up to Charlie and I was going to apologize. And he simply just raised his hand and said, "I'm so glad you were moved." Fast forward, 5 years later, I have a student here named Maisie Luo. She's an artist. She had a dream. The dream was this, that a northern right Atlantic whale had come into her dream and said, "Show us the way when the waters rise." That was it. And what she decided to do as an artist was to figure out where the waters were going to come. And she found out that the sea rise in 70 years would cover Harvard Yard. She then bought a door, an 8-foot door, turned it sideways, and painted this magnificent North Atlantic right whale, bound, lashed by fishing nets, with her very small body putting her hand where its heart was. Then she asked members of her community if they would help her carry that whale, swim that whale through Cambridge so that they would know the way. And so on Massachusetts Avenue, we started, and we all carried this 8-foot Northern Atlantic right whale all the way up Mass Avenue, past the Cambridge Commons, crossed the street, entered Harvard Yard, went all the way through Harvard Yard, stopped at the library, and held that whale, continued past Memorial Chapel, the Museum of Natural History, and eventually found our way with the whale up the steps to the Divinity School, past the chapel, into where this whale now resides. Would you believe me when I tell you not one person stopped and said, "Who is this? What is this whale? What are you doing?" It was like we had entered some other dreamscape, that something was dreaming us. About 8 weeks, I don't know how much longer, we heard on the news that the northern right whale in the Atlantic, there had been no births for several years. There has been an explosion of births. Coincidence? Possibly. Does someone have to dream the way for us to know? Possibly. But I kept thinking of Barry Lopez's story in The Drought. Someone has to be foolish enough to dance the dance of the long-legged bird so the rain can come. Someone had to be foolish enough to take that dream vow, to find that way so that when the waters rise, the whales will have a path. That's what I'm thinking about, Mary Evelyn. I have a question for you, Mary Evelyn. Knowing what you know and how you've studied the consciousness of the universe, I mean, how do you see this collective consciousness, the universe mind in our minds? Can you talk about that a bit?
Well, thank you, Terry. It's a powerful question, which will take me the rest of my life probably to answer. But, you know, I see the power of, you could say in a Confucian framework, cosmos, earth, human. That's their trinity. You can see the power of interbeing that Stephanie referred to, Thich Nhat Hanh's beautiful phrase. But, you know, Jung also had this idea that our unconscious is nature itself. And the cutting away of our unconscious from the power of rocks and stones and rivers and mountains and trees and birds and reptiles has created this dis-ease in us. So one of the things I studied in graduate school, my own thesis, was chi, this matter spirit, this vital force, this life energy, which, you know, Stephanie's pointing out all the dualisms that we know in the West, but the vital force of the cosmos, of the stars, of the galaxies, of the black holes, you know, they are calling us, as well as this sensibility that even when we grew up, we didn't understand the Gaian sensibility. We didn't understand this as a living Earth system. And I take these as gifts of the universe, that this is now part, it's an inheritance. It's the sense the ancestors are the stars. The ancestors is the living Earth community. And that to me may be one of the most important, empowering dimensions of our moment. And this breaking down with the heartbreak that we feel every single day, I feel there is this possibility of breakthrough, because it's coming through in art and music and poetry and symphony, and the arts lead the way. The sciences are just beginning to catch up. I can just say very briefly, and then I want you to jump back in. Here I am at this 120-year-old School of the Environment at Yale, and they think that forest management is board foot and the economic profit. And we're having these conversations on trees that have drawn 9,000 people to listen to people reflecting on trees. Robin Kimmerer and Rob McFarlane, David Haskell, Song of Trees. And the forestry school is breaking down that sense of rigid consciousness. This is a gift. It will take time, but that's why the work that both of you have done and continue to do is so critical. And Joanna Macy and all the teachers from the land, Terry. So what I want to then put back towards both of you is in this sense of breaking down to break through, and the sense of sadness, disempowerment. You've just given examples, of course, but how can we do this in relation to the next generation? Because I feel if we can have an intergenerational handshake, we again have the possibility of going through the hourglass of extinction that E.O. Wilson spoke about. But what does that look like for the next generation? Empowerment, life, living, loving, dancing. Stephanie, what comes to your mind?
Well, we should probably ask them.
Yes.
I think it looks very, very different depending on what you're looking at. One thing that an older generation has to offer, if we are bold and fearless, we are facing our own deaths. We're taking our practice with death very seriously. I know for me, I'm so thrilled to find out that there is a decomposing facility only an hour away from here, and I'll be able to be turned into dirt. And I've already picked out a place to put the cubic yard of compost that I will become. That's very liberating. That means I can really support young people with a sense of freedom and release, knowing that the work will carry on beyond me. They aren't thinking in those terms. They need to fill up their lives with beauty and projects and confidence and see real movement and be available for a kind of emergence. So I think the word I would use here is reciprocity. How can we be real partners in offering where we are in our own life stages and collaborate even in some way? What the younger generation can learn through our own practice is how to pay attention, the techniques of mindfulness, the vigor of bodhicitta mind, of pledging always to be doing your actions on behalf of others, a kind of dedication and commitment that builds up over the years. And one of the things we really work with in Buddhist trainings around this, and I've been part of a socially engaged Buddhist training here for the last year as a faculty member at Upaya, and we really talk about no attachment to results. Don't get hung up on what it's going to be in the future per se, but just keep staying present, present, present. And I will say that from a Buddhist perspective, community is key. There are three refuges, three jewels in the Buddhist philosophy of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the teacher, the teachings, but the community is where it's all held. And one of the consequences of hyper-individualism is that we've really degraded our community skills. So this is where I think we need to work in the crucible of Sangha, of being in a practice center together, a neighborhood board together, a city commission together, and belonging. How can we belong to the planet in an abstract way if we don't see where we belong to place, to watershed, to mountain range, to neighborhood? So I really want to emphasize as a teacher how important this kind of spiritual or religious education is for Buddhist centers. And you will find it in the more culturally based centers that are Vietnamese or Thai or Korean. But the Western centers still really need to, I would say, increase their efforts for the young people so that they feel safe in a Buddhist center, safe, supported, and able to really build their capacity, and particularly capacity for mental stability. I want them to know what the four noble dwelling places are. They're so beautiful. They probably know about metta, loving kindness, because they're really trying to help themselves be kind to themselves and their friends. But there's also compassion, staying open to suffering, karuna, mudita, the hardest one of all, but the most fun, sympathetic joy. But I think the most important for our times coming, and something older people can definitely offer to younger people, is upekkha, equanimity, investing in stability rather than constant newness, holding to something that's solid, reliable, and kind of place you can lean in. That's my way of trying to be a tree, I suppose. So that's what I think will help young people not turn away, as Terry said, to bring up their courage and valor and their dedication, and we'll cheer each other on. It's not just us cheering them, but them cheering us on. So we really take our place as the elder mother trees in the forest.
I love that. And I'm conscious, if I can say this aloud, that the three of us women bonders here, we don't have children, but I suspect we all have seen our students as our children, at least we do. And Terry, you are doing such amazing work. Some of the things you shared with your class at Harvard, I don't know if that's one area you'd like to share, but the weather reports that you did last semester. So how do you see this mutually empowering intergenerational sensibility emerging?
It's the thing that I'm most committed to because I know who my elders have been. You know, I knew 5 of my great grandparents, and they really brought the sense of continuity forward. And I know that I enlivened their lives. And I was thinking about the weather reports. And Stephanie, I had to laugh. We've also picked out our plot because in Grand County, you can just be buried in the ground. Same. And Brooke and I were trying to find our place, you know, in Castle Valley. And he said, "How will we know?" And I said, "Oh, we'll know." And when we went to this little cemetery, I knew exactly where it was because the badger had already dug the hole. So that's where we're going to be. We'll have roommates. But the weather reports, I think coming out of this really, I was filled with despair. And honestly, for the first time in my life, I was really having anxiety attacks. Great Salt Lake put me over the edge. You know, it really did. And I needed help. I needed to belong to a community of witness. And the weather reports came out of that. What's the weather report where you live? What are you seeing? What are you thinking? And it wasn't the kind of, how do I say this? It wasn't the kind of intelligence Harvard is used to. It was the intelligence of witness. It was the intelligence of story. It was an emotional intelligence. So we heard from people like Bernadette Dementiev from the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. She's Gwich'in. She is the director of the Gwich'in Steering Committee. And she said, can you believe me when I tell you that my heart and the caribou heart are one? Mm-hmm. Can you believe me when I tell you that the death of my son is the same grief I feel for the death of the porcupine herd? Mm-hmm. That kind of intelligence, that kind of witness, that kind of knowing. We had a fire salon so that after these 10 weeks of weather reports, every Tuesday, these were on Monday, every Tuesday, whatever students at Harvard, the Divinity School, all the schools, could come and sit around the fire from 6 till it was done. Mm. And in the beginning, those fire salons were hard. We cried. We listened to one another. There was tremendous grief, climate grief. That's what I heard from the students. Mm-hmm. And we held the space together. Mm-hmm. And they asked how I dealt with grief. And we had hard, honest, sharp-edged conversations. There was nothing performative. And there wasn't the kind of fear I see in the classroom. It was dark. We were with trees. We were with rain. We were in a nor'easter. There was humor. Through that 10 weeks, the grief had been transformed into engagement. They had formed a community. They were not alone. And there was laughter, and there was joy, and there was fierceness. And what we decided to do, and I'll tell this quickly, is take this community and then put it into the structure of a classroom. What would happen? And that's where we are now. And what I can tell you in this class of Finding Beauty in a Broken World, and as they are writing their braided essays, which are both memoir and taking a social issue and braiding that together in place, I have never seen such powerful work, such vulnerable work, such beautiful work. And it's because they are writing out of community and for community. That's what I'm seeing. But in closing, the other day in class, they all looked dead. I looked dead. We were exhausted. It's April. You know, there was no vitality. And all of a sudden, I just said, get up, off the floor, up. And Maggie Rogers, who's a musician and songwriter, has been part of the Divinity School. And I just put on her new album, you know, her new song, which is called There's Where I Am. And I held it up and I said, we are dancing to Maggie. And everyone looked at me like I'd gone mad. And I said, up, now, dance. And all of a sudden it was kind of, you know, slow. And then everyone started dancing. We were in such joy, turning the tables over, dancing on top of the tables. Don't tell, please. And all of a sudden they came alive. We were sitting on the ground. Our shoes were off. And it got very real, very fast. The color was back in their faces. The joy had emerged. And the conversation began. That's what I'm seeing.
Beautiful. And that's part of what Stephanie, of course, is saying, the mutual enhancement, right? Of
That's exactly right, Stephanie. Yes.
Yeah. So fantastic. Just beautiful. So, you know, maybe we'll just conclude with some reflections, maybe brief, but on other action. You've given such great examples, both of you, but actions or practices that we might undertake in this time of unraveling. It includes dance, right? It includes Buddhist practices, Stephanie said, but any other things that rise up in your consciousness or unconsciousness? Stephanie, how about you?
Well, this is a little bit in the category of what should I do? The question everybody always asks you. And
right.
It's kind of a trap, actually, because it's part of the path is to ask the question of yourself, a kind of walkabout you need to do with yourself. And if someone else tells you to do something, it won't really stick. It has to really be called from within. But what we can do is offer some guidelines. And I found this little climate checklist, and it really impressed me. It was from Paul Hawken's book, Regeneration. So, for example, the first one, and he's a Buddhist. In fact, he practiced at the same center as me, Green Gulch Zen Center, for a while. But he's a small b Buddhist. Paul does not need to go on about being a Buddhist in order to do his really good work in the world. So this book, Regeneration, is about how to reclaim the world in a generation that he really sees it's possible. And the first question is, does the action create more life or reduce it? Does it heal the future or steal the future? These kinds of questions help somebody think, well, I don't know, does it do this or that? Does it enhance well-being, human well-being, or diminish it? Does it prevent disease or profit from it? And just a couple of the others, there's 12 in the whole list, but does it restore land or degrade it? Does it reduce poverty or expand it? And in short, when you take all these together, fundamental human rights, does it increase global warming, etc., is the activity, this sums it all up, is it extractive? Is it taking? Is it stealing from people or from the land or from our spirits? Or is it regenerative? That one question can really help people make their choices, whether it's choices about food, about mobility, about energy, about whether to have a child. This is a very alive question for young people today. And that's one place I really want to keep them company. Those who make the difficult choice to do it, to cheer them on, to have their backs, so many going through IVF to do it. It's really remarkable, but it's very hard. It's not automatic. And that's a regenerative activity. Please adopt me. I'll be your aunt or your grandmother, whatever you need. But I think that makes it very straightforward. Is it extractive or regenerative? And which side do you want to be on? Join us in being regenerative. We can invite them and welcome them onto that path. They will find a way. They'll find the right way with those key words. And we don't need to tell them what it is. We just
Love
need
it.
to be there cheering.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. Terry, what about you?
First of all, I just want to thank you both so much. Stephanie, thank you for your wisdom. It's so wonderful to see you again, and your books have meant so much to me. And Mary Evelyn, you are one of my teachers. And I have two practices. I'm not Buddhist, but you gave me one of them. You gave me your green teapot and tea set, and tea has become a spiritual practice for me, a quieting of my soul, taking time to be still and to pay attention. And the other practice that I am devoted to is night walking. I'm trying to develop night vision. I'm deeply fond of owls. And I want to know, how do we train ourselves to see in the dark? And in the desert, I walk every night, and I'm learning things. My eyes are changing. I can see color at night, even when it's not the full moon. So those are my two practices: night walking and drinking tea. And I just want to convey my love to both of you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I want to echo what Stephanie said, this notion of pragmatism that's so huge in our society. What do we do? Sometimes nothing, just sitting, just being, and so on. So I love that. And I love it especially because, we have these values like life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and it is definitely always about the individual. It's not about the night owls. It's not about the rodents or the ants and so on. So expanding this idea of the well-being of the earth community I think is what we're all after. And this exciting re-understanding that Native peoples have had, that it's a living, breathing, communicating Earth community, that sentience doesn't rest just in the human. Sentience is bursting out all over in migrations of the salmon and the caribou and the turtles and so on. Incredible sentience. And so I so value both of you for the paths that you've chosen, for the teaching that you've done. Stephanie, years and years at the University of Vermont, heading up the environmental studies program with great generosity, with incredible encouragement of next generations. And starting with your work together, Dharma Rain with Ken Kraft, and our work together on Buddhism and Ecology. I just thank you so much. And for keeping Johanna's incredible light, not just alive, but spreading, continuing. It's such a gift. And Terry, dear friend, desert friend, incredible witness friend to our living kin. You give us this grace to come again, to be on our knees, whether in the deserts or the mountains or the forests. You illuminate the way of resonance and reciprocity and vital force. We thank you. We thank you both, and to Tricycle as well, for this wonderful opportunity to be friends together, to celebrate joy, to have life again.
Mary Evelyn, I just have to say, when I think of the word flourish, which is your word, wherever you are, ideas flourish, we flourish. And thank you.
Mutually enhancing.
Yes, and thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. What a joy.
Thank you all so much for what a beautiful and inspiring conversation. I can't wait to listen back and take notes on all the things I missed. Really beautiful. Thank you again. And thank you for everyone who came to join us and to listen. We hope that you enjoyed the week's events and that you'll catch some of the other talks that are being put on as part of our Buddhism and Ecology Summit. And thank you all again. Have a beautiful evening.